MDC at that time was concerned enough that he found out later, they were concerned enough to have been ready to pay his mother, who owned the company, $100,000 in order to build the dam at the lower end of compensating reservoir, because they were afraid they were infringing on his water rights. So I don't think anything should be done until that matter, as far as any disposal or even consider it, until such time as that matter is thoroughly researched. Those water rights.
Somebody owned a water company? Who was it?
Yeah,
Mr. Priest?
They turned it over here, what,
and their rights predated
maybe?
MDC, so I know they were concerned about it because they came out several times when I was first selectman and
We
wanted to buy
talked
the
about
water
this
company.
way back then, you're right. I remember
Yes,
that.
they wanted to buy the water company, and the reason they wanted to buy it was not for the water, they wanted to clear up this matter of the water rights. And this enters into negotiations on property taxes, the rights to the water themselves. I mean, it has a lot of implications. I used to kid Al Helt when he'd come out and approach the subject and say, no, I'm just going to wait and put a 48-inch meter on the line going into Hartford. But it is something that they were very much concerned about over a long period of time. And I've been trying to get people to research it, but no one would ever put the time into it. I thought maybe Dave Kreml would. I mentioned it to him, and I've mentioned it to a few other people over the years, but no one has had the time to really go in and do that. So when I heard that you were meeting today, I thought that, you know, that should be certainly considered before anything is done, and it's probably something that ought to be considered in an executive session if it's a potential legal matter. I'm back to doing taxes.
Thank you, Bob.
Wow.
Can you give me the summary version?
No. Here, I'll have the piece of paper. Has something to do with the priest.
It doesn't sound like it should be at this table.
What's this?
I just got it today.
I want to give nothing in.
I remember we talked about this when Bob was,
Is it
I
bad
was
news?
on the board of selectmen.
It's
That
not
was
bad, it's just
30 years ago.
spend more money.
It never got resolved.
But it's an issue with the WPCA, right?
Yeah, it's not us, it goes to the WPCA.
I mean, it ultimately
And the
could.
selectmen, because if that's a legitimate concern,
Well, I mean,
someone
the
ought
guy
to go
sold
back.
the water company.
Huh?
The guy sold the water company to whom?
Turned it over, bank, gave it to the town.
The town bought it.
No,
No, he just turned it
Well,
over.
you turned it over for $1, probably.
yeah, he walked away from it. That's how the town got into business, what, 1976,
And
was
that's
it?
when we had to buy the water company property behind our house. Because the right of way to that water company property was our driveway, which was like 3 feet from the kitchen.
Up here?
Mhm.
Down here?
Anita was first selectman, because we had to buy it under her.
I'm not sure I got her to the meeting.
So what do? We now own the compensating reservoir, is that what you're saying?
If we really want some,
We're done now.
we want some back money.
Yeah, I moved to
That's
adjourn.
interesting, I found other cases like that. Cold case?
I mean, I'll give you my gut feel about that. We have absolutely no connection with MDC, period. End of discussion. The only discovered connection that I ever found with MDC, as Bob knows,
$210 a month.
was
Still paying it. Still paying it, bud.
connection
It's in the
of
water supply plan,
Still paying it.
a line from the main
It's
that
the
would
repeal
buy
of the Clean Water Act.
on the 219 pumping station. And as of about 12 years ago, unless someone's figured out how to make a connection jump 3 feet, it was disconnected. That's the good news. Because, and the reason it was is because when the water statutes changed and the feds said you could no longer do what we were doing,
Can't drink
the
that
Clean
water.
Water Act, you had to take and make that disconnection from the water system.
But the fire department wants us to keep the hope alive that someday we would hook it back up so those two hydrants would
Well,
be operable.
one hydrant is operable.
One is operable just
And
because
one
of the
is
force of the thing.
They're both painted as operable,
Mhm.
which ought to go for a nice guessing game when they go down there.
I think they got different tops on them, but one's black, one's red.
But we have paid Bob, you know I'm gonna do this.
Yeah.
We
Pay about
have-
$200 a month.
It's $109.85 a month for 53 years. And we've had no beneficial use of the line. And it is that about a year ago, we did some research to determine whether it could be connected. There is a reasonable approach that says, no, it wouldn't be, and won't be, except, as Bob points out, to connect for one firefighter.
Right. I asked the fire chief, you want us to pull the plug on this? No. Mark said no. You never know when that school's gonna burn
I'll
down.
take him out for a beer, he'll say yes.
How are you, Dan? I'm good.
We're on camera. We got you
Ah,
on camera.
Just wait till
We
Christine.
could look it back
I'm
up.
sure you'll cut that part out, because the meeting hasn't started.
I couldn't miss Bob Lagoy though. I mean, I've never seen him in town
Oh,
hall
the part where we
before.
talked about talking
Yeah.
in executive session.
Oh, right, yeah.
After he read you what it was that we would talk about in executive session. Oh.
Forgot that.
I remember you doing a piece one time on journalistic standards. I'd like to remind you of that today.
Oh, boy.
I'm all done.
We give Bill a little bit to chance. We give Bill a chance to
Oh.
come back in.
Did we all see that document that Bob wrote, or no?
No, I guess
Okay.
not.
The problem with White Rock?
Hmm.
I had to read it twice because
Is it something we should make copies of and everybody get, or is it just something you wanna hang on to till the next meeting?
It's confusing. No, it isn't confusing. It
Public
says we're gonna
document.
do traffic counts
yeah,
again.
me putting something in writing and giving it to me.
Redo or more?
More.
That's what happens when you do a good job.
Oh, they decided they want another level of detail that wasn't originally on the capture list. So they want us to do it for one more day, but it'll only take 2 people.
Well, because he did, he's got hourly. Hourly voters, so.
Yeah. I didn't send him that answer. In fact, that was to you and Mike.
Hey, how are you? Doing good?
You have practice tonight?
5:30. Morgan's starting it up. I'm already almost finished. Oh, you gonna go tomorrow?
What is that thing you bought?
We're making just copies.
Oh, okay.
Let's just call to order and we can just give a brief synopsis of where we were and where we're going. And maybe we can agree on what the best, I think when we left it last time, we fundamentally all kind of agreed that maybe things have changed for some people since they were more intimately involved with the clean wastewater systems. So we wanted to provide an opportunity to do a little presentation so that, you know, we could get everybody up to an even level of understanding. So we talked with Bob about possibly giving us a quick, we sent out a lot of information, obviously, this past
I
through
don't know if I can give
the,
it to you, I'm not sure.
through the email system, which is good. But maybe Bob can take, if everybody's in agreement, Bob could take maybe 10 minutes and give us a little snapshot on operations. And perhaps we could hear from Bud and Roy for 10 minutes about collection system and their experience on that end. And then perhaps maybe a little briefer discussion about Kate and Christine's field trip that they went down. Yeah,
Field trip,
they went on a
yeah.
field trip for us.
Milford.
So, and then, you know, if that's, you know, if we spend 40 minutes on that, we can do a Q&A that could kind of bring us all, hopefully, to at least the beginning of an understanding of where we are. And then I think that at that point, there's gonna be a period of digestion, because I know a lot of times when I get confronted with the quantity of paper that's on the table that's on right now, is that a lot of times I need to go home and think about it, and then the better questions come out. You know, they don't come out frequently in the first 5 minutes of going through all these things. And I have to admit that I'm still a little bit in the other room with the FEMA auditor, who I just spent the last 2 hours with. dealing with Hurricane Irene and Lee. So, which, we got a six-figure request in, so trying to make sure that we have everything in our town covered. But I do appreciate everybody coming back and willingness to do this once again. I really appreciate everybody's willingness to try to come together to try to, if we end up making a recommendation here of some way, shape, or form that can ultimately help our users and our taxpayers, I think it's great, so. Bob, do you wanna
Yeah,
start
I'll
us
take a
off
shot
with
at it. I mean,
Hang on, I don't know if we wanna go through and then have questions at the end, let Bob have 10 minutes
Yeah,
and
let
then
me
go.
take
Sure,
10 minutes.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that some of us are more aware of the issues than others, and that would include Bud and Roy and myself and Steve and Dan, to the extent, and Christine, to the extent that we have been watching all these pieces of paper for quite a while. And Christine is kind of command central for the user base and knows a lot about what goes on day to day. So I think the place to start, and I'm just picking it as one of the documents we have, and if you haven't had a chance to look at it, you probably want to spend some time with it. It's the adopted budget for this current year. And in a nutshell, there's also a document with some bar graphs on it that came through. And what this is an analysis of the first 3 quarters of the current budgeted year.
Was that? I was gonna say, okay.
I didn't get that one.
You got a couple of those?
Yeah, I got it in the email.
I didn't get it.
All right.
I didn't bring it. Oh, here.
Well, we can run through the copier for everybody.
Okay. Let me just talk to you about it, because it's not, you can make copies of it, you know, so we don't slow the thing down. So basically what we got is we have an adopted budget, and it is, let's see, in a gross sense, if I have the right one.
This one's your top. FYI 2012, June 23rd.
Yeah, that's the one.
This one here? Okay.
So in this document, you will see what our anticipated, our projected budget was for both routine operations, non-routine operations on the water side, which basically is about 180 grand. On the sewer side for routine and non-routine was 360. So our total projected, our total anticipated budget was 590,000 bucks, more or less. And that includes the ongoing debt service on both sides of the operation. And that at the present time is about 78,000, I believe, on the water side. There are 5 bonds that are still outstanding. And there's one, of course, one giant bond for the USDA loan that we are currently in, which is at about 70,000 per year, which is going to go to 120 some odd thousand per year in 2013. So, just so this budget, if you look at this 590 number, it's going to at least have to go up $50,000 next year to pay the user base share of the 61% split that was passed by the Board of Finance and the Board of Selectmen and the WPCA several years ago. What the graph shows you is where we are for 3 quarters. And you can see we're in the black, not by much. You'll see that on the monthly side, on the right-hand side, it spikes up and down. And that's just because of the function of the billing. The billing is done quarterly. So we get some money and then we draw it down, pay our expenses, and we get some money and we draw it down. So year to date, our actual revenue is somewhere in the neighborhood of 450, and our year-to-date expenses are slightly under that. So we're just about breaking even under the current arrangement. And there is an issue about collections, so I'm just gonna divert to that. It developed with the changeover in the billing that, we've got a lot of, unpaid balances. And, we recently, began working more closely with Computil, and we have reduced the unpaid balances, I think, to the neighborhood of $67,000. They were at a high, I believe, at about 92.
Can I ask a question about that?
Mhm.
What are they doing differently to reduce that? Because when we talked to them, they said they were not allowed to send out second bills, they were not allowed to send out shut-off notices, they were not allowed to lien the property. So how are they bringing in money?
We put together a process of sending out a warning letter and enforcing the current regulations. And the current regulations require someone who's overdue more than 90 days to enter into an agreement that they will pay down 20% and then enter into a unspecified payment plan thereafter. If they don't do that, the current regs authorize a shut-off. But we have not, as a committee, gone to the shut-off step yet. We have not told them to shut anybody off, because we are looking to see on the first blast whether we can get the number down significantly. Now, I'll tell you, of the 67,000, there are 2 businesses in town that owe us 20. So if we could get those folks to honor their obligations, and they certainly seem to have the cash flow based on what we can see from information from the Secretary of State.
Are the businesses in operation?
Totally, making a lot of money. So one of the businesses has agreed to pay $2,000 a month on top of their regular charges, so I think we've got that one under control, and may be able to come even with the table sometime in July or August. The other one is unwilling to do very much, and that's in the hands of one of our committee members to see what we do.
But there are no finance charges or anything for being late?
We do not have finance charges in our current regulations. We have a shut-off notice if you don't come across with the letter and do the 20% and then the payoff. The rest of them are small accounts, and we're trying to be sensitive to the user base. I mean, we have one case of a bankruptcy which we can't touch once they file. We just have several people that are behind, and we're just trying to see where it goes. I think we'll get there. I don't want to get into the thing, we've had a little bit of a legal issue about who has the authority to do the liens. Our lawyer told us last week that we do, but then we have to go do them, and all that does is preserve your,
Right.
it doesn't get you any money. To get the money, you have to move for foreclosure, which is a very expensive operation. So we're trying to sort all that out. But that is budget related.
Bob, the
Okay.
67,000 currently outstanding,
Yeah.
want to understand, is it 90 days or over 120 days?
I can check, there's the number. I can't tell.
It
from
sounds like you
Dave's-
got an action plan beginning at 90, but I was questioning,
I think this balance, and this thing is cut off, it's 66,000 over 120. Over 120, because there's just the way the thing works. If I send you a bill on April 1st and you're a user, and you don't pay it until June 30th, 90 days, you're good. You're not overdue at all.
Your clock doesn't even actually start until June.
Exactly. So you've really got to go a long way before our regs
Literally
kick in.
6 months.
Exactly. So it's a very lenient, liberal policy.
An observation that I would make is that for an agency of this age, not to have something as cut and dried as a collections policy and practice in place that gets implemented like clockwork with a automatic routine of things being invoked, especially with a new billing agency, put you guys in a jeopardy position for the 67,000 that you didn't have to be in. If it is that these trigger points were jump-started when they committed.
Well, it has not been
I'm not trying to
clockwork operation.
oil on the fire, I'm just,
No, we'll get there. we'll get the money, we'll either preserve it or we'll get there, but some people just don't have it. They're just not gonna pay. I can tell you that. It's either because of their financial and economic conditions, or in some cases, they're landlords that are letting their property go. They really don't care about it. It's just melting up, and it's gonna lead to a lien, but that's not gonna lead to any cash. So, you know, we're gonna have some bad debt out there. We're gonna have to wait for the transfer of the property if anybody buys it. So, that's a number that's come down. I hope it comes down to close to 30,000, let's say, by the end of the fiscal year. I think that would be a target, and then the rest of it
How
would
does
be
this
locked up.
relate to the historical carryout?
I don't know the answer to
Is
that.
2012 a real anomaly?
Yeah, I think it was a real anomaly, and it's mostly an anomaly because of the two business owners that kicked up the $20,000 debt. They just stopped paying for some reason.
But if we took them out of the picture,
We're at 47, and then I think we would come down. I don't know the historical. I mean, I can go back in the past budgets and see what kind of debt service we were carrying on that. I don't know. I just don't know the answer to that question. So, that's the budget. And so, when you look at the budget, and one of the questions I guess the committee wants to look at is, well, you know, what are we paying for? You know, what are we getting? What's the efficacy of what we're paying for? So basically, that's a hard question to answer, because I think that it's two components. It's one, what are you actually paying on a value basis, on a unit basis compared to other people, but it's also tied up with the plant itself, because the plant itself is got to be maintained, and the plant itself is more expensive to maintain than the old plant. The old plant was the old plant. The new plant, and the old plant had a capacity supposedly of 90,000 gallons a day. It was actually receiving on average 67,000 gallons a day. The new plant has a 400,000 gallon capacity and is receiving a whopping total of 75,000 a day. So it's operating at 20% of its built capacity. One of the things that happened when we went to the 400,000 from the 90,000 is we crossed over the threshold of 150,000 gallons per day. That moved us under the DEP regulations from a Class 2 facility to a Class 3 facility. That required us to hire and keep on site 2 full-time operators as opposed to 1. We have to do that unless we get some relief from DEP, which is unlikely, because they would have to give us a suspension of our permit in essence, and we'd have to guarantee them somehow that there was a backup competent person ready. We're going to be burdened by those labor costs, and there doesn't seem to be much around it. So there's 2 things going on there. That's one thing. There's the big plant, you got to maintain it, because you can't just let it deteriorate. You just got to make sure it keeps working, even though you're not using 80% of it. You got to pay the labor costs. So it's hard to get your arms around a unit cost, and I'll try to get some of that from you. I got something from DEP from 2009 called the cost to the consumer just on wastewater. And we had a brief discussion before we started here. And if you looked at it, based on the rates that New Hartford charges for sewer, which is $18.94 per 1,000 gallons, 5 of which we ship off to debt service. Based on that, we average about, let's say, 600, maybe, I should say maybe about $500 per customer for wastewater. That puts us in the area of, according to these statistics, New London 585, Ledyard 672, Norfolk 835, East Haddam 850. So of the various towns and cities here, 45, we're probably up around 38, just on these numbers. But you have to appreciate the numbers in terms of a couple of things. The residential units that are involved. And our units are very tiny. We do not have a lot of sewer units compared to the other units. So you'd have to really true up the numbers. But because of the size of the plant, our numbers are going to be high we do have high sewer rates. On the water side, I don't have the cost of the consumer data on the water side, but I would suspect they're about average to above average on the water side. They're not cheap. And so on the water side, it's $7.32 per 1,000 gallons, of which we divert $2.15 to the debt service that I spoke of earlier. So that's the rate structure.
213 goes to debt service?
$2.15 goes to debt service.
As
So
opposed to 5.
it's supposed to 5 on the
Did you say-
wastewater
did you
side.
say 5 even?
5 even, 5 even. So, that's the lay of the land, and if the committee wants to drill down into that, I mean, I think it's a fine thing to do, to see what we're paying, because I think, I don't know that our contracts with United Water and with the water planner are anywhere out of line. I don't think that the town is overpaying for those services. I don't know if they're underpaying. I think they're competitive contracts, but I'll let whatever examination speak for itself. I don't know the answer to that, but I don't think we are. We have a sludge removal contract, which I know is very, very competitive. With Veolia, which we just did retroactive to January 1st, 2012. And on the money side, because I guess we're talking money here, status, we have, and then I'll stop, because I don't want to run into baseball practice before too long. There's like this whole other money thing sitting over here, and I think we ought to appreciate it as we go forward. And that other side is the remaining USDA grant funds, because that's tied up a little bit with the future. To the extent that we have finished counting, and we have finished counting that there are $455,000 or so left to the USDA grant sitting in Northwest Community Bank in our bank account, and to the extent that the regional director of USDA agrees with us that that is the number, and further agrees with us that it is okay to expend those funds for the town of New Hartford for specific purposes, i.e. slight modifications to the plant that are consistent with the original design, and we have already gone to the Board of Selectmen and identified maybe $70,000 worth of those. I forget what the number is, something like that.
We had a talk in conjunction with the steep grant application. Just for clarification, I've had similar conversations with what you've had with Mary, hypothetically about using it. But I do have several emails that are in our system right now, because Mary is coming to grips with her auditing process and the realization that we were fronted money in an unusual procedure. Usually, when you do these building projects, you have a project manager who gives you monthly stipends as the bills come in. Well, Blake financed this on a ban. The money was all bought in-house, and then in a single day closing to pay off the ban and to get us right, they sent us the whole amount of money when these guys were working and were actually under budget. So there are these excess funds.
They've never had that happen. So
They've
they
never had
screwed
this
up.
happen before, and now Mary is going through the realization
But she
that.
gave the money away before she knew what. how
Before
much
she
it
knew
And
was.
what it was.
I think there's a little realization on her end of, it was okay to use the excess funds to apply for it, as long as the money might have been over there and not here. And now there's the realization of, oh, wow. So there are a couple emails that I need to respond to specifically to Mary by tomorrow morning. And Christine just basically told her, look, we've been going all day at this. But I've had those same conversations with Mary, and she has seemed very amenable to the processes of what we've talked about.
Right.
And I'm hopeful that we can keep her on that same path
Yeah.
to do that.
And I'll just-
I don't wanna divert too much.
No, but it's
That is a
important.
big issue, and it's
No,
very
it's
important.
a huge issue, because if we can access the 455, it becomes important for fixes or mods to the plant, plus sewer extensions. So,
But I don't want you to leave operations first.
Right,
Because I
right.
think we left out two questions that
okay,
came to my
go
mind.
ahead.
Just for
Shoot 'em
points
in
of
there.
clarification. As we know, our town runs July 1 to June. When you put these numbers out here, do you run on the same timeline or do you calendar?
We have a fiscal year budget.
Okay, fiscal year, same timing.
Yeah.
To get to this point, the one thing, and I know it's on one of the pages because I saw it, just the realization publicly, what has it taken from a rate increase perspective over the last few years for your user group to sustain these numbers to get them where they are? It's been
What do you think, Steve? 4 every year for about 3-4 years?
Rate increases, you mean?
5%. That's what I thought it was.
Since our 4.3
4.5,
according to
5,
this.
yeah.
Actually, it's a little worse than that when you think about it because of the searcher.
Yeah.
Okay, so just an acknowledgement that the ratepayers that are paying that, it's been going up every year.
Absolutely.
Four
There's no
to
question about
5%.
it. Which is why we're seeing some of the
It's not been flat and
delinquencies.
stable, we've been
Exactly.
asking more, that's all I was trying to say is.
Good point, Bob.
the-
Which is
Yeah,
why
but-
we're seeing some of the delinquencies.
But did I not read in the assumption document of the rate making that you guys for 2012 reverted to the rates for 2011? Which
No.
in my mind, I swore I saw that wording.
Well, we raised our rates for 2011. We raised our rates
No,
for,
I understand, you raised them for 2011,
Yeah.
but you, for 2012,
You got rid of the
sustaining-
surcharge and went back to a
you're
pay down.
sustaining the same rate structure as you had in 2011, so you didn't increase the rates for 2012. I'm making that as a statement asking,
I don't know.
am I correct?
I don't know what the answer to that is. I would have to check with Michelle because he runs the numbers, but I'd have to check on that. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, I mean, because that was the statement that was made in the assumption document. And I caught it funny, because on one hand, I thought what you were saying was you had increased it like kind each of the years.
Well, if you
including-
didn't, then somebody owes me some money because I'm a user.
So, let's move along just to
Okay,
keep
but
on
that's
to our
an open
schedule.
question.
It is an open question.
Okay.
And let's talk a little bit about collection system and the observation that you guys have had over the last couple of years, being intensive on that side of it, and maybe a status report of your observations in terms of what you see, what you've seen, what we've repaired, what's out there. I'm sure you guys have thought the process of how you're gonna present it, so I don't wanna guide you too much. Why don't you guys take over for 10 or 15 minutes and tell us what you see. Some thought. Are
You're
you,
being called upon.
are you ready
Oh.
to transition into
I-
collection? I thought you were deep in thought, you were making a
Yeah,
note.
I was thinking about it.
Yeah.
Rates increasing,
I'll-
but there's an
I'll
open
tell you what,
question for 212.
As a result of that, I'll actually talk about one more subject than I'm supposed to, and give back time to boot. Rather than take time from this meeting to discuss this summary conditions report, I'd like to give it to you. There are references here as to the sources, and there is some necessary detail that you could either research on your own if you'd like to, or accept the summary for what it's worth, which is kind of a summary condition report of waste and clean water operations. The only important thing that I read here is this: summary was prepared from data aggregated from the 2004 wastewater facilities plan prepared by McGuire Group. The water supply plan of 2001 is updated through 2006. Anecdotal information compiled from minutes, situation reports, video images, pictures, and verbal representations from those familiar with New Hartford's clean wastewater systems. Where we have specific firsthand walking knowledge, Maine, Brook, Farmington Line, Jones Mountain Line, with a combination of water planet and Bach efforts to kind of identify where manholes were and things like that, you'll see specific observations about those things. Otherwise, there's a little bit of historical data in here, and the rest of it is some general thoughts, including the fact that I had contacted United Water and Connecticut Water and just said, as it related to the water system in New Hartford, if you were grading it on an A through F basis, what would you generally ascribe as a rating? A C. And 52% of our pipes were installed before 1895, which blew my mind.
1895,
Yeah, and they're still good.
as far as we know.
I feel like we've just been jinxed. Who said that? Don't say that again.
On a subject not ascribed to us, not assigned to us for reporting, sometime between our last meeting and this meeting, I just casually went to Dan and said, you know, I'm not, with what I'm saying, try to get us to some preconceived notion of where I think we ought to be. but the thought dawned on me. Should we make some general inquiries of a nature that say, if we're going to do some discovery on the third option we were talking about, lease or sale of this, should we talk with some people generally that would just give us some coaching, guidance, and direction to say, oh, that's possible, or, hey, guess what, guys, you couldn't do that in a million years because of these reasons. And so Dan says, yeah, that probably makes sense. And I said, well, look, I'm gonna take a low profile with it, because I'm not gonna try to create a situation where we advance notice anything that's being, for which there's discovery work being done. So I called the Office of Policy and Management, who to this point in time is the only organization that came back to me. And I said, I'm a member of a task force that's looking at options with regard to town assets, and wonders that if we were talking about the sale of either clean or wastewater assets, would there be guidelines, directions, regulations, administrative rules, etc., that Office of Policy and Management would hold us accountable for? Caused them to do considerable homework. They came back to me today and said they couldn't find anything. That doesn't mean that there might not be some obligations, but that as far as their research took them, they were aware of no rule that they would play. The other call that I made was to the Office of Attorney General, assumed the same spiel. I've yet to hear back from them. I have been referred to 2 organizational structures within the Attorney General's office. One of them is the DPUC unit. The other is the environmental unit. So I have logged calls with specifically the people who head those organizations up with the same question being researched. There is an open question, and I wanted to, in deference to the statement I made to Bob before we adjourned from our last meeting, look, we're not gonna go around contacting people. Of all people, I've been given George Hick's name as why don't you make an inquiry and see if DEP, and I think I've got the kind of relationship with George. I can call him and just say, hey, George, on the task force, we're doing this. I want to let you know that this courtesy before I did it. I'll give him a call and just ask him as well. The guy from OPM thinks what's going to happen is we try to get that kind of baseline information. He says, I think you're going to get a lot of this referring. We think it's somebody else's issue. Because the first thing he said to me is, I think you either want to be with the Attorney General's office or DEP. And in the Attorney General's office, they said, well, you might want to be talking to people in OPM. So we're into that bureaucratic morass, just to get some indication of if we were pursuing that. And I would imagine that there are some guidelines, some direction somewhere. We have a letter from Connecticut Water when they had expressed an interest, and they did say that would be subject to regulatory approvals as required by, and they put down a list of agencies. So obviously those are the agencies that I'm contacting to find out what the ground rules are. So it's just a case of not wanting to get to the point where we say, okay, now let's roll up our sleeves and do something on that, and somebody says, hey, read regulation 157-3, you're doing nothing. And we say, oh, we can't do discovery, we can't do an analysis.
I don't think, it's pretty common practice. Aquarium does it, Connecticut Water, so I mean, it's not a new invention, you just have to jump through these series of hoops to, you know.
I just suspect that in case, you know, I go back to when we did the plant upgrade, the first thing we did was go to DEP and we said, you know, you guys have been through this a million times, I'm sure you give us a checklist of everything that we need to do. And it was, duh. There was no checklist. There were no guidelines. There was no template for us to follow. So it may be the case here, but it would pay to know that. So that's a report on that piece. If you wind up having any questions as it relates to the conditions report, by all means, don't hesitate to ask. If we don't know something, we'll try to research it. I was going to make a comment in there that one of the difficulties that we find that we have is the multiple sets of maps, drawings, I mean, even recent stuff, when the bank work was done over here and they went down and they show a picture of where this line should terminate, it did not terminate here. We know that now. And we find drawings, say 1991, hand-sketched drawings. Well, that was the date somebody found the picture, because there are buildings that are not represented on there that had to come sometime between 67 and 91. There are sewer mains shown that do not exist. So when somebody says, well, fix that, you got a problem over there, it's well, when we did the Main Street thing, you were saying, I don't think you want to go that direction, I think you want to come this direction. That's only 180 degrees. So, anyway, I see this document now being more informational, to put everybody on the same page, and it may have some future use in a general description of attributes of the system in identifying somebody if we get to a point where it is that we explore interest or option 3. I'm done.
Okay. Just for clarification, I know that we're on video here, so if anybody is to watch this video, can we put a couple numbers out there in terms of just the length of the collection system and the length of the water system, just so if there's somebody here, just so, I mean, we all have this information. I'm reading,
We have about 14,000 feet of what are known as primary interceptor mains, and we have about 6,000 feet of interceptor mains, and then we have about 350 feet of high-pressure PVC that is utilized between the pumping station to a main, because of it is the surge pumping that takes place there.
so we're talking 4 miles of collection
Yes,
system.
for which we have less than 1,000 feet of documented video activity that shows actual condition reports.
A little bit bigger than what I was anticipating.
On the water side, we have, my recollection is about 66,000 feet, 60,950 feet, of which 52% was installed prior to 1895, with mains ranging in size from 2 inches to 12 inches. We have the various and sundry types of pipe: cast iron, asbestos cement, and ductile iron. We have the 2 water tanks, of course, and we have a surge pump steel road to provide pressure for the houses that are served either further up the hill. So that's a quick and dirty solution.
We asked for data, we have some.
Yeah.
So let's just round that up at roughly 12 miles of water line, with the significant issue being that our tanks are up in the industrial park. I'm sure that has something to do with the surplus. You gotta get from these wells in Pine Meadow under the river and over to the industrial park and back. I mean, that's probably adding a couple miles onto it, right?
You know, when you mention the wells in Pine Meadow, there's just one adjunct fact here that I might mention. I think everyone associates wells with being maybe a deep artesian type. I mean, they are artesian wells, don't get me wrong. But if memory serves me right, the Blackbridge well is only 82 feet deep. And I think the one down in the other portion of Pine Meadow is only 79 feet deep. And together they have a combined capacity for more than 500,000 gallons a day. But it is that those are fairly low. Shallow. Which begs some level of concern. Back at the time we did the expansion on the sewer plant, and the EIE document was filed with concerns, and we did a public response on behalf of the town saying, we think that the DEP should give significant consideration to recognizing that we have an aquifer and that our most aged septic systems are in the Pine Meadow section. So we respectfully request you addendum that to your report to show our concern for it. Because we had a conversation with the DEP that such things as monitoring wells, et cetera, were a proven after the fact insignificant way to go about doing it. Because by the time you detect something in a monitoring well, you're toast. You already have the pollution. so that the activity we wanted to reference, and in reality, we thought it would give us a heads-up opportunity to apply for additional funds for line additions as a stated reason. We wanted to make sure that we could protect our aquifer. And I think that that's still on a future basis is a good strategy for regard to trying to ensure that, you know, in any application we make for funds, that we emphasize that. We want to protect the aquifer. Now I'm done.
Okay, so to kind of summarize it, 4 miles of sewer line, 12 miles of water line, 2 active wells with 650,000 gallons worth of capacity, 2 water
No,
tanks
550 on the wells, 650,000 capacity in the water tanks.
in the tanks. And none of the older connections that were up on Steel Road with the Jones, those were the old historical feeders long before. Weren't those ponds and those reservoirs back in the day? That's where it originally started, right? But none of those are active. There's no connection to MDC.
One would assume they are not.
Okay.
That as of 1972, with the Clean Water Act, they wouldn't have qualified for connection.
It amazes me that you could pump 500,000 gallons a day out of 2 wells that are not less than 100 feet
We're on
deep.
water table, and we have extremely good pressure coming out of the industrial market so far up in the air.
Yeah.
You turn on your
Isn't that
tap, you have
something?
great pressure.
Wow. Anybody have any questions on that? Pretty
Yeah.
brief, pretty concise. And we've videoed 1,000 feet, not a whole lot, but out of 14, what did we say, 14,000?
Less than 1,000 feet.
14,000 of the larger mains
Yeah,
and
we-
6,000 of the smaller. We've only videoed in the last
Less
couple of
than
years
1,000 feet.
1,000 feet. Okay. Roy, you had a point?
Yeah, I have a question. You're talking about a 500 gallon a day capacity.
500,000
Thousand.
gallon,
In 100 days, that's 5 million gallons. Or am I off?
Continue your point, no.
Oh, am I,
yeah. 500,000.
Yeah.
okay. Well, your annual report says you produced 37 million gallons. So how do you, there's a discrepancy there. In 365 days, you produce, based on what you just said at 500, you produce somewhere around 18 million gallons. And yet in the annual report, it was just filed recently. Again, if I understand this correctly, it says 37,420,000 gallons, which I'm interpreting as million gallons.
Well, I mean, 500,000, add 2 zeros, that's 50 million. That's not 5 million, that's 50 million.
50, okay, all right, then that's what I was asking.
Add 2 zeros.
That makes it better.
Okay, we took that scare away.
No, that's right.
The
We
rest-
missed a
the
0
rest-
on the first run by.
The rest was inflow. But that's standards.
Okay. Everybody knows where all the infrastructure is, right? I mean, we're all pretty familiar with where the tanks are. I've only been up to the tanks once or twice, up behind Jamco, or what was Jamco. We have a new property owner in the industrial park, so we're waiting to see with bated breath where that goes. But, and then the wells. We all know where the wells are at the end of Church Street and by New Hartford Elementary School. But, does anybody have any other questions for Bud and Roy about their observations on collection? Maybe.
I think one thing that the town may want to do is to really get a handle on the complete status of the infrastructure and the rest of the wastewater collection system. Because if you go through the flushing operations that we've been through, the water system is working, and I agree with the C rating. the thing about the wastewater collection system is we really don't know. And when we go to price it, if we're going out in the open market, or whether it stays where it is, a troublesome area could one day appear and completely knock the pins out from under the entire financial structure of the operation. And we've already seen a little bit of that with that $250,000 steep grant, which part of went to repair Brook and now wasn't near enough to repair Maine, because when we got to Maine, we ran into a mess. And if there is one more mess somewhere, or two more messes somewhere that we don't know about, it's going to be a major issue either at the time of sale, because no one's gonna price the thing without doing that due diligence. But from the WPCA's point of view and the town's point of view, not knowing is worse than knowing. Even if you know where the problems areas are, at least you know, and you can begin to put into place strategies for attacking them. And that I think is a big missing piece here. That's a huge missing piece.
As you will recall, Bob, one of the observations that Bob made as we started doing the discovery work on these projects was that we asked the engineers routinely, if you were going to approach this and look at the health of the system, what would you do? And they would do a system-wide survey, and they would put flow meters, and they would access with cameras all the mains. And it was, from a budgetary figuring standpoint, they said that probably, refresh my memory, was it 35 to 40 grand?
It was less than 35. It's about 30.
Was it 30? Okay.
So, we're gonna get a quote, we're gonna get a quote on that from a company called
For the
Tata
entire?
and Howard, an engineering firm, a small engineering firm in Connecticut. Shortly, because they're doing the same for Tom. And we don't have 35,000 or 25,000 or 45,000 over in the WPCA budget. But we're gonna get a quote, because it is a necessary piece of information for this town to have. And they do that, just as you said, it's going around every nook and cranny, every manhole with a flow meter, there's cameras, and finding out what you can, and they tell you, here it is, folks, for better or worse. And I really think that's incumbent upon us to find the funds to do that. We have to get our arms around what's out
It's
there.
stated in what?
Tata and Howard, T-A-T-A and Howard.
Before we move on, let's just for the record describe physically. We're all a little familiar just with the geography from our history here, but we're dealing with a fragmented collection system on the sewer side where we've got Prospect Street and Loomis section on the other side of the river, coming across the river to the pump station. The High Street section coming down the hill, all meeting at the pump station at the corner opposite Dunkin' Donuts, which then has to be pumped up that hill through another no man's land behind Church Street,
The railroad bed.
the railroad bed, down across through Waring. Now, how do you identify?
Black Hammer LLC.
Black Hammer LLC, the former Waring, we're historically challenged.
I have a couple other names for them.
So, I mean, we have a section across here and a section across here divided by the river. Then we have a third and fourth section of the Pine Meadow Farms on one side of the highway catching the far side. And then we have River Run. So we really have these 3 or 4 micro areas divided by some significant geographical challenges. Farmington River right through the middle. The big elevation change and that singular pump station, which frequently is the source of a high bill every once in a while when it goes bad. A lot of money's gone into that to rebuild it over the last couple of
Better
years.
than Prospect Street Station.
Right? But didn't we put $5,000 or $10,000 into that last year?
Well, that we put,
To rebuild?
well, we had a panel issue there, which we kind of resolved, but the big issue was when it went out, when the transformers blew, courtesy of CLNP, and we had to pay maybe $9,000–10,000 to take, from Russ to take the sewage out of the pumping station down to the plant to be treated.
Yeah, that's just the carrying, but I'm talking about the pumps and the electrical were
Yeah,
redone, right?
it's getting, I mean, I think we've got a better fix on it now. The Prospect Street Station pump is really not a very good pump. And we got a quote on doing something with that last month, which is about $6,000. It's just not, they're not state of the art. They've gone by state of the art. So what happens is they just punk out. We incur overtime costs to go down there, and it's nothing but a short or something, and then we gotta turn it back on, and we're out 2-3 hours, or it is something, and Steve put together, if you're on the system, you got your bill this month, and you got this lovely little letter from the WPCA about what not to put down the toilet, because that also, that stopped the Prospect Street Station, one day, for a couple of days. So, yeah, there are issues with the pump stations, they're not, and they're a little greasy, you know, the fog thing isn't really taking effect, there's certain people that aren't in compliance with it, so. Yeah, the pump stations, although they're operable, they do yeoman's work, quite frankly, for this system, because the system, as you just outlined, is kind of a, you know, it's a little bit of a strange system.
It is.
You go
It's very
under the river,
geographically challenged.
up to a railroad bed, down a street.
Catch some more houses, then
Yeah.
across the highway to get the condominiums.
Right, which leads us
finished.
to another point I just wanna throw out quickly. We have, on the map, there are 35 identified abutters within 100 feet of the existing sewer pipe. And then we're having a workshop meeting, the WPCA, April 25th, to finalize, I hope, our approach to the orders to connect and to implement them. So there'll be 35
Bob,
people.
explain to the group, initially we did a survey and it looked like there were 79 people who were abutters, who hadn't connected.
Parcels.
With the, yes, parcels, that had previously bypassed connection to the system. What brings us now to a level of 35?
Well, when Brent Pierce tried to finalize and did finalize the sewer service area map for submission to the DEP commissioner, we have 35 parcels with houses on them that we can order to connect, because it doesn't have anybody on them.
Okay, so those were, the remaining were vacant parcels. To what extent do the 35 come from the 13 that we didn't hook up originally on Church Street and Pine Meadow section?
A lot. Almost all of that section, as you go behind the businesses on 44, which are connected, and then as you catch the back of the Episcopal Church and the railroad bed, and you go back through there, many of those are not connected. Not connected at all. If you go to Prospect Street, you'll find 2 non-connections from that.
I mean, to the, just for clarity, so this group understands. Any Church Street resident who would hook to that would have an extraordinary lengthy connection, recognizing that those are deep lots abutting the railroad right-of-way, where the line goes through. And in addition to that, they would be required to pump up.
They will need a grinder pump.
And keep in mind this, that line is, by the industry jargon, the worst type of a line to have where it is. It's vitrified clay, 2-foot sections. It was, at first thought it was 12-inch, now it's speculated it may only be 10-inch. It has trees 60 feet in height growing on it. There are washouts. There are sections where both the water pipes on one side and the sewer pipes on the other side remain submerged below water because of runoff from Jones Mountain. The question has been postulated, if you tap into that system and force people to connect, are you going to drive the potential of an issue with the main sewer line? I mean, that's anybody's guess, but I will tell you that, you know, when people have a conversation about the system, those kinds of things come up, and I know they have.
Well, there's a tremendous tension
plan
within,
up.
there's a tremendous tension within the system of raising revenue and enforcing what has always been an ordinance on the books that has never been enforced, and the monetary impact that will have on those residents because they gotta pay for their lateral. They'll be eligible for their benefit assessment, one way or the other. And you then have to deal with the engineering component of what price glory, what are you gonna find when you begin to force these orders to connect? So it's a very troublesome issue, which is why we're having trouble coming to grips with it.
Looking at it from another point of view, could you put a trunk line down the street rather than interceptors going up the hill and connect down at the end of Church Street where the pipe comes across toward Waring? Goes across there somewhere, doesn't it?
It does, but that's a long way down.
Well, it's a long way up for 10 houses too.
No, no, I
If you
know.
look at the relative expense or trade-offs, would it be better, because then you're not affecting that pipe at the top either, for a while?
Well, you have a
A way to
question,
look at it.
coming back to the pump station is all I was thinking. Is
No, I
it
was
easier to
thinking
come
going down
down?
the other way, because the pipe heads that way.
Well, let me postulate something, Bill, because this argument, this discussion has been held with people, and we've said, okay, look at an alternative, and things like, well, don't run the line there, actually run it in Church Street, collect Main Street off of that, Church Street people off of that. Geez, that might make more sense for everybody involved. And somebody says, well, say you commit to the cost of doing that, so you've done nothing to the line up there, and a week following that, the line up there goes to hell anyway. So now you not only have the capital expenditure you just had for that, now you got an operating expenditure for the line that went to hell. And there's reasons to believe, as we sit here, the call could come in at any time.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, it's risk assessment, I mean,
Yeah.
The oddity of the debate also is, don't forget, up above you, you have the Hunt Club that has now just gotten a federal grant and cleared 70 acres of land for habitat restoration. The sheep flow now coming off that mountain has increased significantly over the last year and a half. That trench, that 4 foot wide, 1 foot deep trench that is supposed to carry the water to protect that area down, is typically overburdened because there's not enough foliage up there sucking up the water into the earth anymore, because you've got 70 acres of meadowed, low-level brush now, because the landscape has changed. If you go up to the reservoir, up to the dam, and look up at the far side of Jones Mountain, now you see this little patch. Well, that little patch is what you can see is about half of the clearing of the Hunt Club. The idea of bird shooting is you don't want older, 100-acre trees. You want low-level brush and scrub. That's where the birds all hide. So they went through that whole habitat. And just when you hike to the top of Jones Mountain, you look over from the high trail, it's all open over there now. There's water coming off there, tremendous rate. It's not a brook anymore. In the August storms, Irene and Lee, it was coming out of there like a raging river coming down that mountain. I was shocked to see it for the first time. Of course, that storm event was historic, but to see it coming down.
Well, obviously, the WPCA has its work cut out for it in determining the rank order of what gets done, and whether you impose that or you do your study first and make an assessment as to the
It just all comes down to dealing with the future and the debt service and generating revenue. And it is a huge issue, and hopefully by the end of this process, we can come up with some recommendations or options, none of which are going to look very rosy. But it's going to take some leadership to push them through. That's what's going to take, because they're not going to be revenue neutral. They're going to cost some money. We have 2 wells in places where we don't have sewers. No, not good.
Well, talking about
so
revenue.
that's there's an environmental reason to
Huge.
do it alone,
Huge.
rather than, as opposed to an
Huge.
economic.
Let's segue a little bit and talk about revenue collection. Christine and Kate took a field trip to see how our revenue collection system is handled now off-site by Computil.
Right, and I went into this not knowing anything about it, and I guess United Water contracts with them for $14,000 a year. And we went down to see their office setup. I was looking at it with questioning, is this something we could ever do in-house? So we looked at what they did, what their supplies are, and everything else. So what they do right now is they do the billing for the wastewater and the water. They do import all the information from the meter reading. They purchase and maintain all the stock that they need to send out bills and send out notices and outer envelopes and inner envelopes. They do daily and monthly reporting. They mail out invoices. They mail out delinquent notices. They rebill. They do the annual water report, flushing notices, and then they maintain all their records off-site in case of fire or disaster. They make customer service calls. They maintain an 800 number that people can call and ask questions about. They deal with the work orders and they interface with the service personnel who do the work for the system. They also interface with Christine and everybody who calls here at Town Hall. They make collection calls and payments and deposits. Now, they have 5 employees that work for them, but one of them is assigned to New Hartford, but because they have 5, there's redundancy, there's always somebody to answer the phone. They have tons of paper that they have purchased. They have a copy machine with toner cartridges that are huge. The machines do triple folds, they put everything in the envelope, they do the posting. They scan our checks electronically so they can be deposited in Northwest Bank, and they have a software program that specifically manages these accounts. They have services they can do for us that they haven't been told they can do, which they don't do. They don't add monthly interest, they don't send out liens, they said they don't send out shut-off notices. They could expand their delinquent notices, they could do reminder bills, and they can also do water and sewer line mapping. They say they do that by GPS, and right now they're doing it for Con Ed in New York. There were a couple of concerns they mentioned, because that was one of the questions I had. What can we do better? What are your concerns with us? They said, we have a policy that individual tenants are charged, not the property owners. So in one case, an individual tenant left without paying the bill, and the property owner can't be liened because it's the individual person, so there's no recourse in recuperating that money. They said New Hartford has the highest rate of accounts in arrears over 120 days than any other city or town they handle. They handle Bridgeport, Stamford, Hyannis, Massachusetts, and I didn't write down all the other ones. So it's a huge operation, and I think for the $14,000 that they're paid, they do a great job. In order for us to duplicate that in-house would be an extraordinary cost in terms of personnel and equipment. It was a very interesting visit.
I have to imagine that their postage a year is $2,000. $14,000?
They said that they were getting a heck of a deal.
They're not making money on New Hartford, is what they said. They have larger accounts that offset some of the costs. So, you know, by them being able to do billing for several towns, the equipment that they have there is for all those large accounts.
So Lila and you just couldn't work this in part-time?
Absolutely not! Did I say that loud enough?
Christine would need an
She's still
assistant.
stressed out about the FEMA submission. I wouldn't go there if you saw how it's this thing.
And the small cities compliance.
Correct me
Oh
if
my
I'm wrong,
God,
but
yeah, that's coming up.
in Hartford, while the WPCA benefits from Computill's lower costs, it's really United Water
Right, yes,
who struck the
Yes.
deal,
yes,
and you just benefit ultimately.
yes.
Yeah, well, when we went out to bid, when we cracked Connecticut in half, because they used to do both, in the RFP, you had to bid as an addendum the billing. And United Water was the only company that bid on both the water and the sewer and on the billing. So, because United Water is such a big operation, they embed in their bid Computil. And so we cracked their bid in half because we did better on the sewer side with water better. We kept them for the billing for both sides. And, you know, it has worked out. I mean, we have these issues about the collection, and some of it is that our ordinances are clunky, but they're from a small Connecticut town. where the town didn't operate that way. In Bridgeport, they lien you for 20 cents. It's automatic. And, you know, that's just not the way New Hartford did business going back 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, we have to do business differently, but that's the thing we're reckoning. But there was an explosion over the last 12 to 24 months. Some of it was the misfeed of information, some of it was the recession, some of it was just some companies that need to come to town.
Bob, you mentioned something that I would ask you just to make a general comment about, because I think it walks the line of potential future negotiations. I think somewhere I read that we have agreements in place with both Water Planet and United that will take us through 2013.
Yeah, and we have escalators. We have escalators, and we could extend.
Do we have any indicators at this point, given mutual working relationship, the desire to continue doing business, that those are gonna be lasting relationships? Or has anybody suggested, by the way, you shouldn't be counting on us participating?
I would say, and I'll let Steve speak to this, because he's our man on the ground with dealing with the Water Planet every day, because he authorizes the expenditures and routine charges. But I would say that we have two very, very competent vendors. I've been very impressed by the nature of the expertise in both companies. It's a matter of price. That's what's going to come down to. If somebody else can come down and we can think that they give us a better price when the rubber hits the road, we're going to have to look at it seriously. But in terms of operations, keeping the place going, I think both of these companies have done a very good job. We met our nitrogen credit, we got our check under the cap and trade. $720.
$720
Hey, 3 pounds is better than 5 pounds, you know what I mean? And that's hard to do. You're running a plant that's that big, and the mixed liquor is funny. You know, you don't have a lot of it, so it's one of these deals. So it's running, and the water guys have been great. We haven't had a lot of nonsense with the water people. Alan's right out there when somebody has a problem. He's in their house, he's in their basement. So I think they've all gone above and beyond for us. You know, Ted, when we had the poor guy across the street here. Frank, yeah, when he had his problem, I mean, you know, Ted was out there at 7 o'clock in the morning with a truck, and so it's a matter of price. I mean, they may not want us, but I haven't heard that.
I haven't heard that either.
No.
I just want to say something, because we're talking about these professionals that are being paid to do the job. But I look at you guys, and you're volunteers, and this is an enormous responsibility in terms of what you have to know about, you know, the regulations and the plant and the billing, and you guys are awesome. But I don't know how long we can go on thinking that people like you are going to spring up and run this water sewer system for us.
I think that's one of the things that we're learning as a town, that the complexities of running all of these organizations, whether they are local fire departments or, you know, subsurface waste disposal systems or these housing grants that Christine does, it's getting to be pretty complex. And the regulations and all the state requirements that are put forth on a small town. When the FEMA guy comes in and I look at him, he comes into town, I said, no, this is it. It's just Christine and I. And he sits there and the jaw kind of drops for a second. I said, no, we make it work. And we get these things done. And it's really shocking, because I think they go into a lot of towns where there's 6 people in the selectman's office, or, you know, 2 people handling WPCA there all the time.
Well, I
That's
don't
not the
think the
case.
townspeople know that this is mostly a volunteer effort, and it's a huge undertaking.
It is.
I reinforce Kate's comments. I come away with a lot more confidence about we know what we're doing. I mean, some tweaks here and there can elevate the whole system a bit, but I think with this information here, it creates a great basis for moving forward and making choices. I was trying to think of an analogy about how an outcome, and I thought about, you know, you sometimes have to break ribs to get somebody breathing again. And I think what's going to happen here is that these decisions aren't going to be easy, and they're going to be hurtful in some way, but the fact of the matter is, this system is so at risk that we just need to do something pretty dramatic, whether it's operational, whether it's financial, or whether it's managerial going forward, some big decisions are gonna have to be made, but I walked away writing a memo a couple of days about having information, and the whale that spouted got the harpoon, because I got a tremendous amount of information, which I think is very, very helpful. I don't know where we're gonna end up, but I'm a lot more confident that we're gonna get there in a mutually complementary and
Well, wherever we wind up, I came here with an objective that we have a plan that would put us where we say we're gonna go.
and we'll get there.
I think what I'd like to do now is, why don't we recess to our next meeting and come back with a digested summary of what we've just had. I think we've got a firm grasp on Christine and Kate's thought process of
Yeah.
the possibility of modifying collections would be a significant uphill challenge and probably not cost effective at $14,000 a year.
Could I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Look, and I say this very respectfully, we're going to have some gnashing of teeth here as we put concepts out,
Oh, absolutely.
or somebody makes assumptions, or says that this is how we think it's gonna roll out, and respectfully, as long as it's done respectfully, I think there's room for that disagreement. But we've gotta have that heart nuts conversation where it is that we get into what's being said that we're going to do and how we're gonna get there, the realism of it, and alternatively, if we can't agree, or if we've got a majority of people who agree we're not gonna get there with that, what does get us there? So that realistically, when any of us has to stand before the townspeople of New Hartford and say, we came to this conclusion for these reasons, which could be supported by these facts. We may be the 8 most unpopular people in this town, conceivably, by whatever conclusions we arrive at. But it is that we're gonna have, have we gotten into the budget projections, the 5-year plan, the discussion about that? I can assure you, Bob would have this opinion, I'd have this thought, Roy would have that thought, Kate would have this. It's gonna get deep. And I'd rather have that meeting sooner. We've got the background information now. I will come prepared with 20 questions the next time.
Well, let's do that. Everybody will have, let's remember that the goal here is to make recommendations. We're coming to grips with the as-is, right? And I thought the next step in our logical thought process is a consideration of any modification or proposed recommendations of as in-house, any transitional in-house, is there a benefit to considering? And then if not, and that's not to say that the as-is questions can't be start off our next meeting, but a transitional question of what it would take to provide those, because your largest sole source of your expenditures are your operational contracts, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that if we were to start next meeting with, we digest the information we have today, we go through, we come in with our questions, and then we talk hypothetically about what it might take to run the WPCA in-house as town employees, what you're going through, what the contracts are. Bob, I sat and watched it as the WPCA negotiated the contracts and went through, but we can see what that takes in a present day scenario to do that in-house, discussing the class 2, class 3 operator, the labor that it would take, the machinery that it would take, vehicles, whatever it would take to run the system as it goes down, versus, the going concern of having guys like Ted, that go out, we just talked about all the good situations where they've had positive feedback from their customer interactions and things are working well. We discuss that and see if we can all come to a common conclusion that is or is not beneficial, or not probable that it will yield savings, similar to what the class trip down to Continental showed us. So if we can do a process of elimination here to say, well, we understand the as-is, we're gonna compare an as in-house, that will lead us down the road. And we can start off our meeting with questions about assumptions about that, but I think a large part of that will be an analysis of what the contracts are next time.
And if there's somebody out there that can, effort the analysis, because I think anybody welcomes the analysis, especially the WPCA, let's just go to the as-is versus bring it in-house. If there's somebody out there that can effort that, I'm all for it. And if someone can take a look at the rate structure, which we talked about, and what our rates really are on a per unit basis, and compare them apples to apples, I think that's helpful as well, because that's gonna give you a better idea of what you're paying for, your 65% of your budget, and whether it's worth it, or whether you can bring 3 people on board as full-time employees with the core competencies that you need on the outside from those companies who have the breadth of overhead to cover you when you're really in trouble, as opposed to, the old town, somebody goes on vacation, somebody moves out of town, I mean, you're gonna hire a town employee, you gotta live in Winston. That's it, you're not gonna drive here from Niantic every day. So
And you gotta have a backup when that guy goes on
you
vacation.
do, and so I think that it's important to see that, and if it jumps out at you, as you could save 20% going in-house, save it. But I just wanna also project, when Bud says the 5-year projections, it may not matter whether you bring it in-house or stay where you are. Because the 5-year projection numbers, based on the non-addition of users, if that continues to be the case, because right now we don't really have a game plan for that, as that user base does not increase, it doesn't matter whether you're in-house or out-house, you still are going to have these major issues, and those are the major issues that we ought to be looking at. How do we solve that? And if that leads to the third option of, well, maybe we can sell it and wave goodbye to it and let the DPUC and rely on them to regulate our water rates then we should look at that.
Yeah,
That's what it comes to.
My sense about the in-house option is that we ought to be able to take a look at some profile budgets of organizations that do this. And then after you take the budget template, insert things like a Class 3 operator, Class 2 operator, salaries at a minimum, midpoint maximum, benefits associated with it, vehicles, spare parts, whatever it happens to be, billing or billing services. I suspect on 2 8x11 sheets of paper, you could come up with a profile of what it would cost as a budgetary example of bringing it in-house. And you may have some asterisks next to things that say, definitely do not bring billing in, contract these services. And you may have other bullets that go down through that. But my guess is you could answer that question relatively simply and quite quickly in a minimum amount of verbiage, and that's a budget template format. And list what the assumptions are that you use on a note sheet of paper that defines it. And if somebody wants to work with me on that, I'm happy to take that on in preparation for the next meeting.
Well, I will also offer up someone who's not here, which is always the easiest thing to do. I'll offer up Michael Clare, who's a newcomer to our committee, and the reason I offer him up,
He works at Simsbury.
he's a foreman in Simsbury, he knows the wastewater collection system in Simsbury, which is in-house, up and down, and he's a tremendous asset, and he'll be able to tell
I
you.
talked to his boss when we first started with the
Sure,
rehab
and
project.
he'll be able to tell you, that's a good deal you got there, you're getting nailed on this, you're getting good, and that's
At
a
least from the
quick and dirty
standpoint of
way.
mapping it,
It's a quick and dirty way to get to some quick assessment of what you got here.
we can do that, and then that allows us to then look more carefully at analyzing, if we maintain the status quo, what will we have to do? I mean, just topically, what I would say is, there are some assumptions currently now that appear no longer to be valid given the current economic situation. So in lieu of that, what would be the alternative assumptions that you use? You say, I will not be able to have economic development that produces this, but I can get 35 customers. Here's the risk analysis associated with it. If I do that, I increase revenues by this, but I've got costs of that. And in order for me to get where I need to be, I have to put Pine Meadow on. If I put 100 users on, my rate structure at its current level would produce this, but I'd have to have a bond or whatever for that, or grants, or loans from USDA, et cetera, in this amount. At least that way, if somebody says to them, well, you chose that way, why did you do it? You'll be able to document that.
Well, if everybody would agree to come with whatever operational or budgetary questions they have to start off our meeting, maybe Bud and I can get together and talk and coax Mike to join us for a subcommittee meeting to get some of his expertise on what it would take. Why don't we start off our meeting in that fashion and see where it takes us? And I think that really with the Q&A to start, we'll really start getting a much more comfortable level with the budget and the as-is, and then we'll segue into the as-in-house possibility as the second component for our next meeting. Anybody want to throw out a date of a possibility of this time?
I'd like to see us meet in 2 weeks, because I think the questions are an easy part of that, and we just dive on the example in the next week or so.
Everybody likes the 4 o'clock?
Works for
Thursday?
me.
Here we go. Can I press at
Well-
3:30?
What meeting, what day, what's the date?
That's your workshop.
26th.
Yeah, we can't do
That's-
we can't do 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't do 2 weeks, I can't even do the workshop, because I have to move that. So I forgot about something else.
So if we move
May
that 3
2nd?
weeks.
We could do it the 3rd, that's a WPCA night, we could meet at 4, and we just
Thursday the
extend, just
third,
extend,
Thursday,
extend the
May
payment
3rd.
to the evening,
May 3rd?
yeah.
Let's do it.
Does that work?
Thumbs up? Thursday the 3rd? And Bud, you
4
and I,
PM was the consensus? 4?
Yeah.
Okay.
we'll reach out to Mike and see if we can't grab Mike for a meeting in between.
I have his phone number, I give him a call and just reintroduce myself and say, hey, this is what we're doing.
Tell them I reassigned them.
Bob made a suggestion that you would cooperate.
Fantastic.
He's a fantastic,
Can I go
asset.
back on the 455? Is there latitude on the use of that?
Yeah, well, we're
Is-
hoping it's,
is there
we're hoping
potential?
it's available,
Right.
and if it's,
The
yeah.
455, the only inconsistency of the 455 money, the excess funds created by coming out of the budget, was when I approached Mary after, subject to audit, we just finalized the audit. The question then became, whose money really is it? Is it the state's money or the Fed's money? Well, the first inclination was that could it be the state's money? Because depending on the way you fill out the monthly forms. Then it was quickly surmised that no, it's
It's not.
federal money.
It's not.
So the
Joe,
forms,
Joe did his homework, right.
we were told in our position with no training, you fill out the form, this is the way you fill it out. The first submission with the USDA representative over our shoulder was
She
incorrect.
wants it zeroed out.
Because she wanted to see the Fed
USDA
funds,
zeroed out.
You don't wanna see anything.
anything
Right.
left.
You got
Yeah,
it.
and the only thing that's gonna make it happen for us is we're gonna have to demonstrate to the USDA that we're gonna spend it tomorrow. Because the USDA is in the business of spending money, not taking money back. It devolves to their benefit to spend the money. So Mary's gonna say, either she's gonna be
What could you spend?
brought to the Inspector General
Line
and brought up
extension.
because she gave us this money early,
Line
or she's gonna
extension,
close
line
the account
repair.
out and said we can start heading right down Cottage Street with the
Right.
remainder.
Right.
Which leads us to more debt, because to the extent that the remaining 455 can be applied towards the Cottage Street extension, which is roughly a 1.2 million thing, all that does is bring the 1.2 million down to, let's say, 900,000 or 800,000, and all that does is reduce the amount of the 75%, 2% loan, but it is still a 2% loan, not a DEP, but anyway.
Which
Right.
adds debt service into
Do
that
you
last
guys know
column,
your,
we know we have
standing on
USDA
the
debt
priority
service.
list and the hearing?
Yeah, they kind of shined a light on us and gave us Cottage Street.
So that's
One
made the committee approve.
It's in this thing,
It's in there.
it's in there, 1.2 million has been reserved for New Hartford for the Cottage Street sewer extension. Then when you go to the rest of the scoring in the back, we got nothing. We got 10 points, we got 8 points, we got 8 points for Cottage, 8 points for Johnny Cake, 8 points for Pine Meadow. So the idea that those are coming online, and Pine Meadow is 3.1 million, because 8 points puts you on the back page, and here's everybody else, here's all the other points.
36
ahead of us.
points,
Yeah,
42
so what they did was they showed pity on us and just said, Cottage Street's in, and they just wrote a sentence to
Well, you
elevate
made a
it.
lot of progress, because the year before that, George just laughed.
He hasn't really stopped laughing.
All right, well, let's adjourn, and let's see each other on the third.
Another,
And Bud, maybe we can talk tomorrow after we talk to Mike. You wanna reach out to Mike?
yeah, I will,
Okay, and just set up with Christine.
maybe we do a